For daily Ask Reddit. r/ask Reddit. What was the quickest way you've seen a new manager screw up a workplace? We had a dude I'm going to hear called Benny. Benny had been a corporate dude and decided he wanted to run a location instead. Corporate agreed and gave him the location I work at. It was clear almost immediately that Benny was a helicopter manager. He would show up unexpectedly and hover. He'd nitpick. He'd ask weird questions. He'd send out lengthy rambling emails about goals he had for us as a team. One morning as my overpass was ending, he arrived unexpectedly, pulled me into his private office, and had an hour-long conversation with me where he revealed he'd been watching me and that he knew I did video editing. I was creeped the fuck out, but admitted that yes, it was something I enjoyed doing periodically as a hobby, alongside a bunch of other creative pursuits. He replied that he wanted me to make a music video starring coworkers to lift the morale of the team. I replied that I'd think about it and got the fuck out as soon as possible. My direct supervisor revealed that she had overheard him talking about firing the entire staff and rehiring from scratch. I told my girlfriend that I was considering quitting based on how the next team meeting went. That evening, I got an email to the tune that Benny had been forced by corporate to resign. He had been caught acting like a fucking sociopath and that in his 1-month tenure employee morale had reached an all-time low. It's been a few years since Benny left, but I remain paranoid about him still to this day. My old new manager jumped on the job. First manager position. Proceeded to demoralize the fuck out of our entire department to the point where she literally had to call us into a team meeting to group apologize for being such a bitch in front of our grams. Then continued to be a bitch cause why not lol. Came in, took over a department, decided to get rid of people who were contractors, even if they'd been there for 3+ years. Didn't care what they did, just axed them. A month later, critical systems were failing, and the people left there just shrugged. He'd axed the people who knew how those systems ran. Guy gets hired as a supervisor, worked on a Disney cruise before, so he thinks he knows how to run a bar. During his interview he points out to a few staff how they're doing minor things wrong. Somehow he's hired, and immediately starts making changes, getting mad whenever anyone does something other than his way. Meanwhile he's rarely seen on the floor, rather, he's in the office creating cocktail guidebooks, while it's extremely busy at the bar. Got into an argument one night where another supervisor who wasn't working at the time got a bit drunk and told him he never helps out and how everyone disliked him. He tries to get said supervisor fired. It backfires and everyone complains about him instead. This all took place in the span of a month. I quit shortly before he was fired. I had a similar manager, came in supposedly with a glowing reputation from his reference, was there for about 6 weeks, sacked me and 2 other casual workers under the pretext of not enough shifts, and then whenever he was working he would vanish to talk with security for a solid half an hour about nothing, go for a smoke or just do shit with the stock in the stock room. Whenever it got busy, it got to the point that almost all the staff that were still there and some of the best regulars began complaining to the owners over him. The owners called some of the places he said he worked and then laughed over the fact he was hired. He's now a truck driver. I was the assistant manager at a pizza chain. The company decided to outside hire without even giving me an interview. I decided that maybe this was the right decision and stayed at my job. My next month was spent training her on how to be my boss. Understandably, this was horrible, so I decided to step down and be a delivery driver. Even though I was no longer a manager, she continued to treat me like her training manager. She spouted off on how awful the current employees were to me in private. Finally, she told me she was going to fire my friend John. I decided to call John at home immediately during my next delivery. While I was gone he drove to work and chewed her out. When I got back she chewed me out for sharing private information, as if I should have even know the information anyway. I quit and went to the competition. Their school account clients came with me when I pitched them to. 4 or 5 weeks. Certainly less than a month. They forced 3 of the most senior staff into resigning and replaced them with their mates who didn't have a clue how to do any job, let alone the one they'd been hired for. This led to several other people, myself included, finding work elsewhere, so suddenly there were only 3 people who knew how the debt worked, and they were all actively looking for work. The department lost a £20 million contract, the 3 members of staff who had been forced to quit eventually won constructive dismissal cases against the company, costing the company another £250,000 in compensation between them. The manager and all his new employees were terminated at the end of their probationary period, and the company desperately tried to encourage a bunch of us to come back. Although the pay rise they offered was so insulting, I don't think anyone did. We were a Pioneer account. The account was a huge US telecommunications company that handed their department to be outsourced to our center from another that hit up. We were excited. For the first 6 months, we flourished so much that the company thought it was a good idea to make our operations manager move to another location to get him to improve that. So he replaced our the old that handled the account at the other center, who fucked up. Basically ran the account to the ground in less than 6 months. Kept hiring more and more people. Only promoted people he liked. Job assignments weren't clear. People kept being reassigned. At the end we had over 500 employees, and he had to fire 300 of them because the account only needed 200. The company suffered a lawsuit and lost the account.